surveys don't count. It has to be, thank you, Kyle. It has to be you spoke with someone. It could be on the phone, it could be a Zoom call or in person. Ideally in person is the best. Amazing. So we're all over the map. Perfect. Awesome. And Kyle, I'll get you to clear that before I move to the next slide because it'll like mess up all this data.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so this is just our last one before we get started. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you did your problem and customer discovery correctly? So 1 is the lowest. So it's I spoke to people but had no idea what I was trying to learn. 5 and 6, like in the middle, would be I tailored my idea based on customer interviews. And then 10 would be I can take over this session on problem customer discovery. Be warned, if you click that one, I might throw this session to you. You never know. So yeah, just take a moment to circle where you're at. All right. Amazing. Great. So everyone seems to have feels like they did a good job problem customer discovery. That's awesome. So first, before I get going, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. Our team likes to do them always before we do any sessions. So today I'm talking to you from the land of the Passamaquoddy people. I'm not in Halifax. I'm actually in my hometown today or this week, maybe 2 weeks, we'll see. So if you hear any like chihuahuas barking in the background, I'm hoping headphones will cut it out, but I have 2 little chihuahuas here and they bark at everything. So just a little bit of a warning. And this is going to be what we're going to learn today. So I first want to start off by talking about why a lot of founders in the beginning tend to skip problem and customer discovery. Then I'm going to talk about why it's so important and why you shouldn't skip it. And then I'm going to go into what is problem customer discovery, give you a 4-step process how to do it. And then very thankful for people that ask questions in Slack for this session. And I'm just going to touch on the questions that were asked. I can see a chat. Oh yeah, Mom Test is best book ever. I have that as a recommendation later on in the slides. And the session is recorded. And if you can be on camera, we very much appreciate that. If not, please just let Kyle know why. I know a few people have messaged me saying that they won't be able to be on camera, and that's okay. All right. So first, I want to start off by touching on why do people skip problem and customer discovery? Because this is something I definitely skipped when I was doing my first venture, and I reflected a lot on why that happened. So just in the chat, have you guys seen this quote before by Henry Ford? Just say yes or no. Chat. Awesome. Yes, yes, great. Yeah, so this is a quote by Henry Ford that he allegedly said. If you research it, it's not even for sure that he said it, but the quote is, if I had to ask my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And this quote can be very misleading. And it's one of the reasons people don't do problem customer discovery, because after reading this, you would think, oh, I don't need to talk to customers. Like, I just have to be a visionary and figure out where I think the future is going. But in reality, Henry Ford very much, he understood that his customers, they wanted to get places quicker and that they also wanted to carry more luggage. So he knew after talking to customers that the best thing was not to, train horses, make them faster, add more horses, is to create something called the car. Another reason that a lot of people skip problem customer discovery is probably an ego. There's kind of this theme with entrepreneurs when you start off that you shouldn't talk to anybody about your idea and that you are this visionary and that you're seeing something that other people can't see and they just won't understand you. This is a quote from Steve Jobs. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. And if you actually look into Steve Jobs quotes on like customers, he has so many talking about how you have to really understand the customer's journey. So Steve Jobs came across as a visionary, and the reason for that is very much he understood his customers better than anyone. And the last reason people tend to skip customer problem discovery is because they think it's going to take too long, which is very counterintuitive, because if you actually do it, you're going to save so much time and money by figuring out if you're pursuing the right idea. And the 4-step process in this presentation will definitely, it won't take you forever. You won't be retired by the time you test it out. So why is problem and customer discovery so important? So the number one reason that startups fail, you might all know this, is that it's no market need. You build something that nobody actually wants, nobody actually needs. You waste tons of time and money on an idea that you should have got rid of a lot sooner. And that trickles down into all the other reasons that startups fail. Like if there's no market need, you're not going to have enough cash to grow your business. You're not going to be able to attract the right talent. So it's very important to talk to your customers before you do anything. So just in the chat, what do you think problem and customer discovery is? I'll try to see it. Just based off of the few slides we did. You could just throw a word in, anything that you think is problem customer discovery related. Talking to customers about their problems, yes. Going out to talk to your users, what their problem is, yep. Understand the pain points, 100%. Making sure there's a match between what you want to create, yep. Like testing out hypothesis. Talking to prospect users about their pain points, exactly. So it's a lot of talking to people. And I think the best definition when you're first talking to potential customers is you're trying to determine if a problem is worth solving and how you can build a solution. And we'll get more into that. And that all ties in with when you talk to your customers, what you're trying to figure out. So this is going to be the 4-step process to determine if a problem is worth solving. The first step is going to be, you're going to evaluate the problem is right for you as the founder to pursue. The second step is going to be problem research, looking into the market and your competition. The third step is going to be how to shrink your idea. As founders, we tend to try to go after everybody, so I'll explain how to do that. And then the final step is how to actually talk to people. And I will be checking the chat after every step for questions. So just because I always find with my computer, it's hard to see the chat while I'm speaking. So the first step is just evaluating if the problem is right for you. And this is something I very much wish I did as a founder when I was doing my first venture. I never stopped to think if it's something that aligns with who I am. So these are questions that I use now when I'm thinking of ideas. And this is something you'll probably add questions that are more related to what you want when you pursue an idea. But the first one is, how did you think of the idea? Is it a vitamin or a painkiller? What skills do you have to tackle this idea? What network do you have to support the idea? And most importantly, if no one knew you were working on this idea, would you be happy to be working on it? So now I'm just going to dive in more for me, when I'm evaluating these questions, how they impact me, and maybe they would impact you as well. So how did you think of this idea? I always ask myself this question because if it's a personal problem, you're going to have more unique insight and know people similar to you and how to go about it. And type of idea you kind of want to avoid pursuing is called a whisper idea. So this is essentially an idea that you just assume would be great because you hear people talk about it. I don't know why, but Uber for dogs, I see that everywhere lately. And whisper idea comes from, you don't know anything about it, so you just whisper it to people because you're so afraid that someone's going to take your idea. Versus if it's a personal problem, you're not afraid to talk about it because you know why you can solve it. So that is just something I mentally do. I personally want to always go after something that I can personally relate to. And the thing is, though, if you do find a whisper idea like Uber for dogs, you could decide, okay, I'm actually going to look into this idea and gain some unique insight. That's completely fine as well. Just don't take an idea and not understand why the idea is a good one. The next thing I always think about when I'm evaluating ideas, if I'm pursuing them, is it a painkiller or is it a vitamin? So I just put a quote here that people tend to forget to take their vitamins in the morning, but the second you have a headache, you'll take an Advil. And personally right now, I only want to pursue things that are painkillers versus vitamins because painkillers are things that people are more likely to buy right away because it's resolving a problem, versus vitamins could be clothing, for example. It's something that you don't necessarily need, but it is something that's nice to have. If you pursue a vitamin, you're going to be very much more focusing on marketing, and it can be a more uphill battle. And then if you're focused on something that is truly solving a problem, then you're just going to be really focusing on figuring out the process that the user customer faces and a solution for them. The third is I always think about what skills do I have and what my network is to help support an idea. I think this is because the first startup I ever did, it was tech, and I had no background in tech at all. So right off the back, I should have known that I need to get like a technical founder. I need to have technical advisors. So now, just personally, when I'm pursuing ideas, I want to be sure that like I could create like a duct tape MVP in 2 weeks, and I don't have to really overthink how to go about it. And the last, but I really think this is like the most important thing for me. Whatever idea you pursue in life, like you should really make sure it's internally rewarding. And by that, I mean, no one knows you're working on it and you're still just getting like so much happiness by working on it. And it becomes very clear very quickly who's working on an idea because they genuinely like just trying things out and tweaking it versus someone who is pursuing an idea because they want to post on social media that they're a CEO and all this stuff. So questions, Roman, I think I saw your hand up.
So when you said technical advisors, how does it usually work with onboarding advisors? Like how often are they paid? How often are they rewarded in some sort of long-term way? Or can it be free through some organizations? How does that look and work?
Yeah, so I only have experience with, it was a family friend. Someone put me in contact with someone who was a tech advisor, like with Amazon. And they just like sat down with me and I just showed them the idea and they just kind of advised me how long it would take. But I think when it comes with any advisors, there's slides later in this presentation on how to reach out to people. And I think you just got to try to develop a relationship with people that have different expertise than you. I know there's one type of advisor that you pay and there's one you don't, but I would just try at this point finding people that want to help youth entrepreneurs and that would give you advice and you can keep them in the loop. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so essentially it's anybody that's an expert in whatever you're looking for. And then it comes down to how you like kind of deal with them, whether there's a relationship or not. And so it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, you just kind of want to try to develop like a friendship with people so they don't feel like, that you're just taking advantage of their time and then you want it to be a mutual beneficial relationship. Carlos.
Yeah, my question is like, would you say, what about board members? Is that kind of like good as well? Like for which industry would that be good and how is that different than advisors as well?
So I'm not completely sure how people go about board members. That might be something, I don't know if Rob's on the call.
Yeah. Yeah, for board members, it's not really something that you probably look at earlier on. If you're raising money, it becomes more of an issue. Like if it's just somebody giving advice, that's not normally a board member seat. It would be people who have like ownership in the company. And so generally what you see is board members become investors or founders or co-founding teams and things like that. With voting shares, and it's much more about control of the organization versus advisors or more people that are like helping like lend their expertise or advice to helping you build your enterprise.
Okay, yeah, thanks for answering.
Awesome, thank you. Any more questions before we move on to step 2? I think there might be chat. Figuring out the customer's needs. Okay. I think that was from my earlier question asking about what problem customer discovery was. Awesome. We'll go to step 2. So step 2 is just doing some problem research online. You could obviously, when you're trying to evaluate if you pursue an idea, you could deep dive into research online for like months. But these are kind of the things that I think top of mind you should know and look into. So when it comes to competitors, you should ideally know your top 3 people that are offering similar value to you. You want to figure out what they do well and what they do not as great. And you can very much go look on product websites and just see like people complaining about certain things. And that's a great indication and opportunity for you to better what they're not good at. Another thing, you just want to look at how big your competitors are, look at how much money they're making, how long they've been around. And when it comes to the market, you just want to know what industry you're in, how big the industry is, money-wise, is the industry growing? There's a video later in this presentation that is Y Combinator, and they're talking about investors love to see if the industry's grown by 20% a year. It's just, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth there. And then another thing to really think about is, why would your idea work now versus like it didn't before? And usually that's due to like a tech change. And it's kind of what Ryan mentioned in his first Ask Me Anything, that you have to try to catch a wave. And it's just a great sign for opportunity. And it's, for example, I'll use Uber. Before there was Uber, you had to call taxis, and it was because people didn't have smartphones. Apps weren't a dominant thing. And now that, you know, most people have smartphones, they can assume that most people will be able to use Uber instead of having to use like a house phone to call people. And that was a very short slide. The other ones are longer, but any questions before I go to step 3?
I'm gonna ask a question. So when it comes to the actual market research, are there specific databases that you guys would recommend to get the most up-to-date information, or how would you go about, like ideally, about researching the market itself, not the competition, but specifically the market size and the traits of the market?
Yeah, I think there is some links I have at the end of this presentation about like where to look for your market. But I know like Crunchbase, even it'll show you like companies that are doing similar ideas to you, how much they've raised, and that's also a really cool thing to check out. Yeah, there's just as long as you know what industry you're in, you can like deep dive into the size of your market for a long period of time. It's just like good to understand how big it is, to understand like, you know, potentially how much you can scale your idea. And if anybody has any great like market links, feel free to drop them in the chat, and Roman, I'll make sure to give you one as well if I didn't put it in this presentation.
I would also say like there isn't like any like golden standard, right? Because we're like thinking about like we're sector and model agnostic at LOI, and that means like there's millions of startups working on millions of different problems, and it's so varied, and a lot of times you just have to make an argument for what your market size is. And so you could argue, you know, what the average spend of somebody could be, or pull data from different things and kind of compile it more of like it's not a science, it's more of an art to describe like what your market opportunity is, and then be convincing of how big it is and what that looks like.
Exactly. And Carlos, like your comment was great. Like, depending on your industry, I'd recommend getting in contact with your competitors and acting like a potential customer, just to like learn from them. That's a great tip.
It's like a secret mission. You got to do them sometimes. It definitely helps.
No, for sure. That's an awesome tip. All right, now we're going to move into shrinking your idea. So the mom test book that was mentioned earlier, this is a quote from it. Startups don't starve, they drown in options. And this is another quote from Tim Ferriss, who wrote the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which is, if your product is for everyone, your product is for no one. You must know who it's not for. So essentially, this is something I see all the time. Startup founders will have an idea and they talk about how it's for everyone. And they talk about like how it's going to impact everybody's lives. And that's great for like vision statements and encouraging people to come on for your team and stuff like that. But when it comes to starting with problem and customer discovery, you really need to shrink who you think your initial customers will be, your early adopters, because the messaging for them and how you resolve problems for them, it's not going to match if you're doing it for everybody. You have to be very tailored and specific to one set group. And how you go about that. So these are some questions you can ask yourself to shrink your idea. So first of all, just what problem are you trying to solve? And then you can list out who are all the potential people that experience the problem. And then after that, you can ask yourself, which of the customers do you feel as if feels the problem the most? So someone that has higher motivators, it's frequent, urgent. And then what you do is you try to find a group online of that customer segment. If you can't find online or in person a group of who you're tailoring your initial customers to, it's probably too vague. So a great example, I think this was in a podcast episode I listened to. They're talking about how people will always say, you know, emailing, it's such a problem, it's a burden, it takes up so much time in your day, which is true. I'm sure everyone on this call feels that. And so a founder that spoke to this podcast host wanted to create a product that solved that. And so he recommended first, like, who feels email pain the most. And they discovered that they think it's freelancers, people that are, working for other people independently. And then they went smaller and thought, okay, maybe it's freelancers that offer services on Udemy. And maybe it's people that have 3 to 5 clients, and maybe it's people that are in Toronto. So the whole point of this is you just want to keep shrinking until you have a specific group that you can find somewhere so that you can start messaging them to do problem customer discovery. Any questions before we move to talking to your customers? All good. Awesome. So this is a slide from Rob's awesome presentation for, I think is either last week or the first week, about chess moves, like stuff that you need to get right as a founder. And the first tip was, it's not about you. And that's something you got to keep in mind when you're doing customer interviews. It's really not your opportunity to try to pitch your idea and why it's so great. It's all about the customer. This is an episode from a podcast, Idea Startup Podcast. It came out in January, and essentially the host, Brian, he was talking about how he just recently bought a house and he needed tips on how to make it look nice. And everybody in his friend group was like, oh, talk to Megan, like she'll give you the best advice possible, how to make your home look good. So he messaged Megan, and Megan came over and was like, oh yeah, you need to knock down all these walls and paint everything white, get white furniture, it'll look fresh. And he didn't like that advice. So he actually hired an interior designer. And the difference is, when the interior designer showed up, she kept going in and out of the house, trying to figure out where they put their coats, where they drop off groceries. She asked them a million questions about if they like to entertain, what type of entertainment do they like to do? Like, do they like to have like a bar set up? Would they like to have more like people watching shows, sports, etc.? And the point of the story is the difference between an amateur and an expert is you focus on your customer. So his friend Megan was projecting what she liked onto him, and the interior designer knew it wasn't about her or what her preferences are or what her house looks like. It was all about Brian, the client, and what would be the best home setup for him. So when you're talking to your customers, this is like early problem customer discovery. There are 3 things that you are trying to figure out. The first thing that you're trying to determine is the customer you identified when you're shrinking your idea actually has the problem. So questions you can ask to try to identify this is like, tell me about the last time you did X. Another question would be, what issues did you face when you did X? And this might make more sense when I do examples, but a few tips when you're asking people, trying to figure out if they actually have the problem. You always want to ask them about past things and never the future, because people are just like habits, like creatures of habit. They do the things that they've always done. So asking about the past, never the future. There was a story, a landlord was trying to figure out if he should put in a gym or an activity room into his building because he had a free space. And so he went around surveying all the tenants, and the tenants that had gone to the gym and do go to the gym, they said they would love a gym. And the people that never went to the gym, but in the building, they said, oh, if there's a gym in the building, I'd 100% like use it. So anyways, the landlord built the gym instead of the activity room. And the people that do go to the gym regularly, they used it. And the people that said they would start going to the gym, they never used it. Just people don't like to change their patterns. So that's why it's very important when you're trying to figure out your customer, you want to make sure that they actually have the problem. And another tip is don't zoom in too quickly when you're talking to people. So I'm going to use Braden from 3 Commons as an example. So if you don't know Braden, he's working on concepts to essentially help people with busy schedules find time to hang out. If he wanted to learn about people, if this was an issue for them, he would ask them, tell me about the last time you hung out with your friends. And, you know, most people probably like, oh, it was great, I did X, Y, Z. And then you could tailor it and be like, okay, what issues did you face when you hung out with your friends? And you want them to bring up the problem on their own. Like, you don't want to zoom in too quickly An example of zooming in too quickly would be if Braden was like, hey, can you please tell me about the last time you hung out with your friends and how annoying it was to plan getting everybody together? Because that's like you're essentially telling your customer the problem. And of course, someone's going to comment on it because you just delivered it to them, and people like to be agreeable, and they'll probably start commenting on, yeah, it was a pain to get everybody together, even if it's a problem they've never like personally felt. The second thing that you want to try to determine when talking to customers is the problem actually worth solving for your customer? Because there is a difference between someone having the problem and someone having the problem and they actually want a solution for it. So a question that you can ask is, what have you already done to try and resolve the problem? If someone hasn't even Googled like how to resolve the problem, chances are it's not a big enough issue in their life to build a solution for them. There was a story in, I think it might have been the mom test, but essentially the offer was talking to a potential client, is a finance client, and they were complaining about how much data they have to go through to present, essentially. And they asked, like, how do you deal with this? Like, how do you deal with all this data? And they're like, oh, like, I just give it to the interns to deal with. So it was just a big indication to the author that this person, like, they may feel the problem, but they don't really care to resolve it. They just pass it on to someone else. So another thing too, a tip, people that have already tried to resolve the issue that you are trying to also resolve, they're going to be your early adopters. So you very much are looking for people that have tried to build out duct tape MVPs themselves, but they just can't quite figure out what the solution will be. The third thing you're trying to figure out, I'm going to minimize this, is the current process someone is using to resolve their problem. And you want to ask them, can you tell me about how you currently do X process? Or what are you trying to accomplish when you do X? The reason is because, again, people are creatures of habit. You want to create something for someone that aligns with how they currently resolve the issue. If you, for example, I'm doing this presentation in Google Slides, and if someone was trying to give me tips on how to do better presentations with Google Slides and they came to me with Microsoft PowerPoint, I probably would halt and have a hard time to transition just because it's not what I typically use. So these are the three things. Definitely figure out if your customer has the problem after you shrunk it. Figure out if the problem is a big enough deal worth solving to someone, or if they're just indifferent and they don't even Google it. And then if those two things happen, you want to figure out the process. You really want to try to figure out what they're doing now, what they like about it, and what they dislike. Something that is very difficult when it comes to doing problem customer discovery is figuring out like how many questions and interviews you should do. So this is something I actually built for the Launch It founders, and it's just a kind of format that you can use. So you put your customer segment, who you think one of your customer bases are. When you shrink it down, you should try to do 10 interviews of that group. And your goal is you want to try to find out if 10 interviews of this ideal customer in your head, if they're saying around the same things. And if they are saying around the same things, and you've probably found a customer segment that's worth, building an MVP or a prototype for. So this just kind of shows, when you talk to them, do they have the problem? Did they try to solve the problem already? And then how do they currently deal with the problem? And then any extra findings you could also include. And I do have this tracker in a Google Sheets if anybody would like it. So these are just some general interview tips, and I will ask if anybody has questions after this slide. So one big thing is you want to record yourself and the conversation. Definitely ask permission to do this, but it just allows you to be in the moment, and so you aren't trying to, hustle and write down notes. Another tip, this is like early problem customer discovery. You want to just pick 3 questions, and you want to try to do like a 15 to 20 minute interview, and you want to keep it casual. The reason to keep it casual is if something's too formal, people tend to not be themselves, and you're just not going to get right answers. To find people, a great thing is to do warm intros. Going to use grade in 3 comments again as an example. Me, him, and Kyle were on a call, a founder had a call, and somehow it came up that I had a friend who, you know, is like the glue of our friend group, that she plans everything. And so I was like, you should talk to her because she's probably the best customer for your idea, because she's someone that probably deals with the most frustration when it comes to planning everybody's lives. So it's always good to try to find warm intros. You can ask your friends, hey, do you know anybody that deals with X problem? Another point is just to talk less and listen more. So that ties in with when you record conversations, you can actually go back and listen to it. And you just want to keep asking the customer, tell me more, and just try to hear everything they have to say. Next point is quality versus quantity. A lot of startup founders, they kind of are just like, I'm going to try to talk to 100 people. And they don't really focus on starting with 1, getting to 2, and then doing 3, and just really having good conversations and making sure you're building a relationship with whoever you're talking to, because that person that you're talking to, you had the initial 3 questions, 15, 20-minute interview. And if you found out there's somebody that matches with your ideal customer persona, then you want to be able to like go back to them with more questions, or you want to be able to go back with them with a prototype and get them to try it out. And if there's somebody that like it doesn't align, they aren't someone that has the problem right away, they're not someone who's trying to resolve it on their own, that's okay too, because if there's someone that you think they're kind of lukewarm, they might be somebody that you market to eventually. So it's always good to just really develop relationships with whoever you're talking to. Next point is don't just talk to customers to check it off the list. I know a lot of people try to rush through it and they're like, yep, I did problem customer discovery, but they never stop to think, what am I actually trying to figure out here? And what am I trying to use these interviews for? And the last point for general interview tips, you want to save all your interviews because you can turn people's wording into marketing material. So you want to listen to like how people complain about their issue and how they discovered other products, and you can turn that all into marketing, because when you use people's words, it builds trust. So I'd rather see an ad that is something I think all the time versus a generic post somewhere. And before I go on to my next slide, I'm just going to check time. All right. And yeah, is there any questions before I move on? All good. I don't think there's anything in the chat. Oh, there's some. Okay, that's Kyle. Me and Kyle are signed into the same YouTube account, so it always confuses me because it looks like I'm posting things. But yeah, tracking super helpful. Yeah, awesome. All right, I will go to the next slide. Feel free to stop me. I'm not sure if I have more slides that actually like cause a break for you guys to ask questions. So I'll try to monitor the chat better and raise your hand as well. That works. So for those of you that read the mom test, this part's going to be a little familiar because these are examples of great questions to ask. So questions you want to ask are questions that talk about their life instead of your idea. Again, you're trying to figure out their past behaviors, when they start thinking about they need a solution. Anything they've done in the past is golden to talk about. Questions that ask about specifics of the past instead of general opinions about the future. Exactly what I said before, kind of ties in. You should ask questions that ask them how they currently do the process, and whatever they're doing right now to resolve the problem, you want to figure out, or how they're dealing with the problem, like what they like about the process, what they dislike, what solutions they've currently already tried, and tools they're still using. Another great question is to figure out how much do people spend on the tools that they're currently using, and if they have a budget to allocate to new solutions, because you could be talking to the wrong person. That could be the intern of a company and they hate something, but they have no say in if they can buy like expensive software to make their life less hectic. Another great question is just asking somebody, why do you bother to do X? Trying to figure out what they want to accomplish. because there may be an easier way to accomplish the task they want to do, and it might be a little bit different than the process they're going through. Also, a great question is, who else should I talk to? Chances are who you're talking to probably knows somebody that is also dealing with the same problem, and that ties in with warm intros. And is there anything else I should have asked? So that's a great question to ask people. Just give them an opportunity to, if you miss something, because you could have been zooming in on a question. This is just something great. They could be like, oh yeah, like you talked about this problem, but my main problem is actually this. So that's just something to think about. But again, I'd only pick 3 questions for first interview, and then you can follow up with more, just because it's hard to get really good answers if you're just throwing a bunch of questions at people. You should go for depth and not quantity when you're interviewing. Just gonna check the chat. All right. So these are some bad questions to ask. So you never want to right out the gate be like, do you think this is a good idea? Would you buy this product if it did X? How much would you pay for this product? Would you ever? So it's just all questions about the future. You don't want to ask them to someone because they're not going to be able to tell you if they would actually use your solution at all. Again, people are creatures of habits. They only can talk about the past, and that's reliable data. Evidently, there is going to be a shift. Eventually, you talk to somebody about their past, and you're going to build a little prototype from the tryout to see if it solves their pain points. And then you can get them to test it out and see if they actually use it to kind of answer these questions without even asking them. So I know there's some tech companies here. So these are questions to ask about features, because if you've ever done a tech idea, you would know that people always ask for new little features all the time, and they don't really explain why, and then they don't end up using them. So these are some great questions. You can ask somebody, why do you want that feature? What would that let you do? How are you currently coping without the feature? And then you could also ask, do you think we should push back the launch to add the feature? Because typically when you launch an MVP, it's not going to have a lot of features. You want to just figure out what features are the best to resolve people's current pain points. And then you can add features later in 2-week cycles. And then you could ask them as well, how would that fit into your day? I put, don't be afraid to fire your customers at the bottom, because unless someone's paying you and they're using the features and they're being a great customer, they could, if they're just wasting your time asking for all these new features, it's okay to just say, no, sorry, we can't build that. And I think that's just great advice that someone once gave me. Marketing campaign. We have used the third question. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's hard because as a founder, you very much go into pitch mode, and you want to, because you're excited about your idea, you want to talk to people about what you do and how it'll help their life. But kind of tying in with what I said earlier is people don't really know what solution they want. They only really know the pain points they have, and they can't really see why what you're doing will help them. So this is for formal meeting requests, because sometimes when you're doing customer and problem discovery, you're going to have to talk to industry experts. You're not going to just talk to someone you meet on Facebook. So the first thing, whenever you reach out to people in an email, you can talk about your vision, say what problem you're trying to solve. And the next thing, you're going to do framing. You're going to talk about what stage you're at, so they know exactly what you're doing. They know you're in the idea stage. You're not trying to get investment from them or anything like that. You're going to talk about your weakness, essentially what you're trying to figure out. And then you're going to put them on a pedestal and compliment them and be like, hey, your industry expertise will help me so much. Please meet with me. And the last point is actually something that Zev, the co-founder of Starbucks, he said once in his last session. His session's tomorrow, by the way. He said, instead of asking somebody, hey, will you meet with me? You should ask them, hey, does Tuesday next week at 5 p.m. work for you? And the reason for this is it skips mentally someone thinking if they want to meet with you to when. So that's just a little life hack that's super helpful. All right. Any questions before I move into founder Slack questions?
Also, feel free to come off mute, everyone, if you guys want to ask questions verbally versus feverishly typing them out. Erin, I actually did have a question in terms of like, you had said to start with 3 questions from that kind of question block. Do you have a recommendation on like a 3 to start with, or like what 3 kind of fit, like, let's say like an earlier stage venture?
Yeah, so it definitely be in the slide that had like what you're trying to figure out. I think I put like 2 question examples for both. There'd be one of those. So the first question, like you want to have a question involving like trying to figure out if your customer actually has the problem. So I just get them to be like, I try to ask them a question about the last time where that problem could have happened, like an event. Like for you, Kyle, let's say, I don't know, if I'm working on a new podcasting mic or something, I could ask you like, last time you recorded a podcast episode, can you tell me about that? And then you kind of like talk about it. And I could just be like, okay, what problems did you encounter? And that would be my first question to figure out if you mention that your microphone was horrible and I'm trying to build a microphone that's better, And then for figuring out if someone actually cares about resolving the problem, I just straight up ask them like, have you tried to do like any other solution yourself? Have you Googled it? Because I think that a lot of people will complain about things and they don't even bother Googling it. Something that I always complain about is ads popping up when our team's trying to play games online, but I don't bother to like get an ad blocker, so it can't be a problem that actually matters that much to me. And then the third one would be just like, a question around process, like figure out what they're currently doing now and just figure out what they like about their current process, what they dislike, because that's going to be how you build out your solution.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
For sure. All right. So now I'm going to move to, there was 3 founder Slack questions. I really like this strategy. I think anytime there's an LOI session, that's something our team should keep doing, is just posting what the session is. And if anybody has any questions, we can address it. I think there's a message. It does take 30 seconds, but I don't care. That's the thing. I am not someone that you should ever try to sell an ad blocker to, because I'm not going to do it. And I kind of like annoying Rob when the ads come on for like 5 minutes about something weird. It's great. So a Slack founder question was, what is the best way to receive honest feedback from a customer? How much weight should you put on what people tell you versus what they actually do? So asking about their past, asking about the last time they did something where the problem could have happened. And I'd put so much weight on what people do versus what they say they're going to do. When you're doing stuff early, you want to ask all about the past. You can't emphasize that enough. This is another question about journey mapping. So is journey mapping something that you or the LOI team have used in the past to better understand the pain points of your customer? If so, where do you start? I will throw this out to like Rob, Kyle, Khaleesi, who's ever in the call from LOI. If you have done journey mapping and want to share experience, feel free. Personally, I did try to do this. There's a great resource too for the person that asked this question right here. But this is essentially what customer journey mapping is. You're trying to figure out like all the touch points your customers have with you. So there's awareness. This is before they even are really considering buying something, before they realize they have a problem, they want to buy something, or they have extra cash and want to buy something. Consideration, looking at all the different options, purchase, service, loyalty, like trying to maintain someone after you provide a service to them. So I have done customer journey mapping. I wish I did it earlier when I was doing interviews, because you could figure out how someone interacts with a past customer product by asking questions in the past about these 5 things. Something that was very difficult with the startup I was pursuing when figuring this out. I was doing like a gifting startup. So trying to figure out when people first become aware that they need to get a gift, usually it's like last minute. So this is something that would be great for like marketing and figuring out when you should start talking to your customers. The idea I was doing is very difficult to figure this out. So yeah, does anyone from the LI team, have they used customer journey mapping planning and have any comments about it?
I mean, it's a huge feature and focus of what we do as an acceleration team. Because the example that I'm sure like Kyle and Erin, like we've had so many conversations about this, is not thinking about like what so much our content is, but how founders are engaging with it, thinking about how people do what we do. And so because of that, we overhauled our program completely, because it just the even though some of the content was good for the program before labs, it's called Launch It, we completely changed the entire thing because of how just learning more about founders and how they interact with it and what made sense and how we could best like, because that whole world is just like UX design or like user experience, because like you could have an app that cures cancer, but if your customer doesn't know how to use it or doesn't hear about you, you're not going to solve that problem for them, right? And so you have to put almost as much, if not more, emphasis on how customers or users are interacting, learning about, signing up for, onboarding, like all of those things with your product as much as you are in your product. Because if you're just doing all product and no user experience, like they're going to be able to utilize a fraction of the value that you're creating. And so until like somebody is actually using your product in a way that is like having the intended impact and like actually utilizing its full ability, that could be a key focus, because it's a lot easier to get people to, rather than keep building more product or do that, try to figure out ways it's more about how you interact with your customers with your product and not so much what your product is. And I think that's a huge focus for our team and something that we're constantly thinking about.
For sure. Kyle, do you have any experience with customer journey mapping with your podcast?
I don't, not yet. And I say not yet because I was on a mentorship call just the other day, and that was something that I've been playing around with a bunch of different podcasting formats right now, because like I've kind of hit this like podcasting plateau, been working at it for a while. I'm trying to kind of like figure out where exactly I fit. And one of the people that I really look up to in the podcasting space was asking, like, how do your listeners interact with your podcast? And I was realizing that I was like, I have no idea. It's like, is this something where they're sitting down with a cup of tea or a glass of wine at the end of the day listening to it? Are they listening to it on the way to work? Is it how does it fit into their lives? And then you can almost like cater tone a little bit more towards like fitting into where it meets them. So yeah, that's something that I'm like actively looking at right now with the projects that I'm working on.
Awesome. So to recap, yes, do customer journey mapping.
Yes, very long-winded, yes.
Yeah, definitely do it. You could start doing it now, and you can very much tailor your questions, ask about people's past to figure out how someone will interact with your product based on how they interacted with other people.
And for those that are using a lean canvas startup, there's a whole column in the lean canvas called customer channels, which is basically how do your customers find out about who you are and that you exist, and how you create those or create effective ones of those is customer like journey mapping, right? So what do they do throughout the day? What do they Google? What websites do they visit? Like what stores are they at? What products are they already buying? Like you need to figure out all these things for your it's called your ICP. If you ever like see an ICP, it stands for ideal customer persona. And like you need to figure out how are people going to find out about your organization and the channels of which you're going to invest eventually one day, marketing dollars or other efforts. That's all based off of your journey map.
100%. Right. So the final question, how do you really ensure you're giving customers what they need as opposed to what they want? I think when I was thinking about this, and I'll also throw it to the OI team as well, I think it really comes down to first, like figuring out who your customers are, figuring out if they actually have the problem, if it's a big enough problem for them, how they currently resolve it. And then you can try to, based on all that data, you're figuring out their needs and you're figuring out what could be a potential solution to meet those needs. And I think the ultimate test to see if you're really giving customers what they need versus what they want is it resolves their problem. They use whatever MVP you designed for them. But yeah, Rob, do you have any thoughts on that, or Kyle as well?
This ties into one of the tips that I shared, which is like don't rush like product market fit. Like don't rush that section. when you are solving the problem that they need, not that they want, they will tell you. Your customers will tell you. You will see it. You'll see reviews. You'll see like referral programs working really well, or word of mouth growth like really high. Like you'll see it. You can tell when you're having that impact.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, I think that communication is huge, and like really understanding, like, when you get into these conversations, like, what are you actually trying to get out of them? And I don't know. I think that that's just like, it almost seems presumptive, like, you know your customer better than they know themselves. And I think that, like, that just comes through. You got to talk and talk and talk and talk and do the work and put the time in, because you're just gonna, like, I don't know. I think that just all comes down to, like Rob said, communication.
All right. So this is kind of final thoughts. We have 4 minutes left. So problem and customer discovery is how you essentially become like a visionary entrepreneur. It's the hack. It will save you so much time and money in the long run. There's really no downside to it. Like, you have to talk to people, and sometimes that can be a little awkward or whatever, but like, that's really the only downside. You're never going to waste your time with it. It's only going to better your direction for your idea. It's going to give you confidence on what you're doing. It'll improve every pitch to any potential employee, any VC. Really just doubling down on who your customer is and their needs will propel your company. And these are some resources. I think when it comes to problem and customer discovery, it takes a while to wrap your brain around how important it is. So I did 4 different blocks. There's tons of resources here about like how to think of ideas, adjusting if they're right for you. This is how to do some competitor and market research. Roman, I think the link I was talking about is in here. And then shrinking your ideas, some tips how to do that, how to figure out what's someone's first hurdle, what problem that you're actually solving for them. And then just talking customers, books, the mom test, 10 out of 10 recommend. It's so good. But yeah, definitely check out all these resources. And we're going to do one last annotation. So I think you guys might have the tools up. If you don't, grab those again. And so, did this session cause you to want to do more problem and customer discovery work? That is my final question, because that was kind of my goal for this. And awesome. Great. Okay, I did my job. Thank goodness. Great, perfect. And yeah, that's everything. I do have a founder huddle in 3 minutes. Wow, appreciate you guys. But I can answer questions for like 2 minutes before I have to jump. Just check the chat. Yeah, it is the most common thing. People tend to just, rush ahead and they don't think to talk to their customers. They just build, and it's just so counterintuitive, but you got to talk to people. Bye, Rob. All right. If there's no questions, feel free to jump off the call. If not, I will be here for another couple minutes.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you for the meeting. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
I think I can probably. Woo. One sec.
Nice. Well done. That was great.
One sec. I'm trying to get to you guys. My screen's all. Oh, no, it's doing that thing again.
When you threw it to me on that last question there, I had accidentally pinned Rob. And so I completely forgot what the screen said. So I was just staring at Rob's face. I was like, yeah, it all comes down to like communication. I will be honest, I had no idea what I was saying.
It worked out.
All right. As long as it sounded somewhat coherent, I'll take it. But
do you want to stop the recording, Kyle?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.